Hello and welcome back to Scale Down Customs. So on the workbench today, I'm going to start building the Revell Lamborghini Countach, the LP500S. So I'm actually going to build this as a gift to someone else who's kind of helping me work on some stuff as well. So I'm going to kind of just burn through this build because I kind of need to get it done quick. So come along for the ride if you want. Hopefully you'll pick up something. Anyway, so let's get building the Lamborghini Countach by Revell. So just looking over the body, it looks pretty good. I am going to have to scribe out some of these panel lines just to make them a little bit deeper. There is a lot of flashing on a lot of these parts. I think this is an older kit because if you look on the floor plate here, Revell 1988. So yeah, not the greatest kit. Like I said, some flashing I'll have to clean off, but like I said, that's kind of how it is for some of these older kits. So I'm going to start by scribing the panel lines, getting everything sanded down, and then the flashing cleaned off and parts ready for primer. And I usually like to scribe my panel lines first because that way if I make a mistake I can kind of sand that down, and I have actually sanded through some of my panel lines on a car before where the lines were really shallow. So I'll be scribing those out first. And the tool I'm going to be using is my panel line scribing tool by Tamiya. This is a really great tool. Interchangeable heads, and anyway, just a great tool to have. So let's get building. All right, the other thing we want to watch for is these mold lines. This one is really prominent on this car. So I'm just going to highlight them with the marker just so I can use that as a guide coat to sand that down and get rid of that mold line. All right, and then for my sanding, I'm just going to be using a Tamiya 600 grit sanding sponge. Now, some of you may be wondering, if you're new into model car building, if sanding the body down prior to primer and paint is necessary. No, it's not necessary, but if you look at how shiny the plastics are before you sand them, the reason that we sand the plastics down is because it gives the primer something to hold on to when you put the primer on, and then the paint then sticks to the primer. So it just allows for a lot better primer adhesion to your plastics. So it'll just give you a better finished paint job. But is it necessary? No, it is not necessary. All right, I'm going to get the rest of these sanded up and ready for primer. All right, so I got all my parts de-sprued and cleaned up, all the mold lines sanded down. So there's a ton of parts for this kit, a lot of little tiny parts too, but lots of parts. And so for my primer, I'm just going to be using the Mr. Surface 1000, and I'll cut it down half and half with Mr. Color Thinner 110. So I'm going to go spray some primer and be back in a little bit. All right, so I got almost all my parts primed up, including the body. So now I'm going to use this first primer coat as a guide coat, and I'm going to start sanding this down because at first blush it actually looks really smooth, but there's going to be high and low spots in the plastic. So I'm going to start sanding this down. Mostly I'm just going to be using a 600 grit sanding sponge from Tamiya, and then just an emery board just so it gives me a straight sanding block. So let's get this sanded down, and I'm ready for another coat of primer. And I am going to be wet sanding this just to help me give a little more lubricity to keep the sanding devices from filling up with primer as quickly. All right, so this is a pretty good example of what I'm talking about. So especially on seam lines, mold lines, panel lines, anything that's raised, you can really start to see the high and low spots when you start sanding this down a little bit. So again, at first blush, it looks really smooth, and it mostly is. Your eye is not really going to catch that, but if you get like a high gloss paint on there, you'll start to see some of those high and low spots come through. So I'm going to go through and get this thing sanded down and smoothed off and ready for our final coat of primer. Alright, so got all my body parts primed, sanded, and primed again, ready for some paint, as well as the body. I've sprayed the inside just black, so that's why I have it taped off, just to kind of protect that a little bit. So let's go spray some paint. And the color I've decided to go with is actually red. So that's what we will be doing. So let's go spray some paint. Alright, so got all the body pieces painted up, so let's move on to some engine prep and assembly. So I like to weather my engine blocks a little bit, and for that I'm going to be using Mr. Weathering color. This is just going to be the multi-black. So I'm going to put this on pretty liberally and then take it off and thin it down with the Solvent 110. All right, I'm going to let that dry up and then I'll be ready for some engine assembly. All right, so now that we got the body painted, before we can clear coat it, I just want to add a couple of decals. So I'm going to do that now. All right, we'll let those dry up, and then I think we'll be ready for some clear coat. All right, so for the interior, I'm gonna do a two-tone. I'm gonna do black and then a beige leather. So for my leather, I'm just gonna be using the Zero Paints Ferrari leather color, just the beige for my tan leather. So I'm gonna spray the tan first, then mask that off, and then spray the rest black. So let's go do that. All right, I got a couple more pieces masked up. I got my interior masked and ready for the black, and then a couple other pieces just masked up again for the black. So let's go spray that. I'm going to be using just the Tamiya semi-gloss black, the X18 for that. coming along. Just got some cleanup on the body to do, and then I need to detail paint the underneath the hood there. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with that.